Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast. Today with me is Eleanor and Ben, both members of Byfield. How are you both?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good. How are you, Ben?
I'm not too bad. Happy that it's Friday morning.
Yes, exactly. We're recording right now at 9 a.m. So bright and early, bushy-tailed, and excited for the weekend, I think. So let's just jump straight into it. We've got a lot to discuss this week. There's been quite a lot in the news. There's been a lot of news in the legal market, and I think we'll start there. So we've had a story by Zoe Hu in Financial News this week that discusses Clifford Chance, open to sort of M&A and private equity investment. That was announced by their boss. What's your thoughts on that? Where do we stand with the sort of private equity investing in law firms?
My view on this is quite. It was almost an afterthought. I think so. If I quote the CC's managing partner, where he says, if external investment becomes available, I wouldn't necessarily say no to it. I wouldn't exclude it. I'm still quoting here, but I'd like to see more and understand more before I think about it. So, very, very sort of light touch hint that it may be of interest. And, lo and behold, it becomes a headline. So a little bit of a learning there. It may have been deliberate, but, if you insinuate something and it's, newsworthy, it becomes a headline. But that aside, I thought even the possibility of CCs taking on private equity to me was quite surprised to read that, and it tells you that all the talk about private equity and law firms is becoming, it's going to extend into some of the biggest firms, and I think people hadn't thought that before. And I've heard from good sources that some really, really big US firms are looking at private equity investment as well. I've been in and around big law firms for 20 odd years, and just, the idiosyncratic nature of law firm partnerships, particularly at the top end, doesn't necessarily strike me as being particularly good bedfellows with private equity, but I might be wrong, and it would be interesting to see.
Yeah, Eleanor, what's your thoughts on that?
I think I'm not surprised it sort of received the press coverage it has. I think the sort of PE investment into law firms is being really, really closely followed by the nationals at the moment. So I think what was perhaps a bit of a throwaway comment has received a bit more media attention that was maybe intention. But I think it sort of signals what is going on in the market. And I think we're only going to continue to see further investment. And I think more and more firms are considering it. Sort of the more medium size and like the larger global firms as well. I think what's more interesting is actually what comes after the PE investment. I think in terms of the ongoing sort of management and operation of the firm, and the input that the sort of PE firm will have on that, I think that's a really interesting sort of side to it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the one stakeholder base that you need to manage, particularly if you are not just Clifford Chance, but any large firm potentially looking for investment, or making it known that you're not averse to it, is your clients. Because the perception is that with clients, that when private equity comes in, the first thing they're going to try and do is increase billings, look at ways of getting more revenue from clients, etc. So I think those questions will come, and the first thing that you'll get if you take on private equity investment as well, surely you're going to start billing us more, you're going to try and get more revenue from us now. Is that not the case? So that is thinking through, I think.
I'll be interested to see. I mean, we've obviously seen the trend in law firms, but is this sort of happening across wider professional services as well? Or it's sort of more in the legal sector than others?
Yeah, well, accountants have long been the target of private equity. In fact, if you take not so much accountants, we take Alex Partners, who I think most people will know, really, really big sort of restructuring and turnaround professional services firm. They're owned by private equity, I think, or at least partially. That seems to have gone pretty well. Right. So I think other areas of professional services are a bit further down the the track.
Mm.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it really comes down to sort of talent retention and talent attraction. I think here Charles says, you know, the challenge is always to find the right partner. And until that happens, if we're in sort of desperate measures, then we'll look at it. As Eleanor said there, you know, it could be blown out of proportion. I think it's something that they're considering. It's not necessarily what they want to do. And I think it is really about sort of honing in on that, attracting the top talent. And if that becomes an issue, then okay, we might need to turn to an alternative. And I think that's kind of where it's coming from, which is quite interesting, because then we kind of go into sort of the talent pool and why aren't you getting the best partners and where are they going instead, which is obviously maybe a topic for another day. So next we have here a spotlight by the lawyer. And it's about the Disputes Boutique, who's knocked on 10 million in revenue in just 4 years. So this is the law firm Quillon, which was established in October of 2021. And they've basically knocked it out of the park in terms of disputes. What do you guys think about sort of this new rise of litigation boutiques?
I think it's high risk but high reward, clearly. And that is sort of paid off for them in their business model, sort of as evidenced by sort of their profits over the past 4 years. So I think it can obviously pay off, but it comes with sort of quite a high degree of risk to sort of base your model on that.
Yeah, I like the model. If you look at Quillon, they don't have a management structure in terms of from the partnership. They put great faith on their supporting to run the business. It's echoes of us at Byfield, really, because all 4 of us directors spend a huge amount of time fee earning and want to. We don't want to be just on running the business. We want to be out there working and winning clients and all that sort of stuff. So I quite like what they've done. I think the interesting point for me is when I was in New York in June, early last month, I was talking to a couple of senior people in big firms, talking about the aftermath of Trump. And we do want to keep this a Trump-free zone today, but I will just say this, that there is a real feeling that the ability of big law firms to run punchy litigation cases is being challenged because of everything that's gone on. You only have to look at the partners that left Paul Weiss to set up on their own. And I think Quillon have maybe got a bit of a head start, and I think we'll see a lot more boutiques. We talked about this, I think, in a previous episode, but we will see more litigation boutiques. And I think a firm like Quillon, which seems to have got its go-to-market and its structure absolutely right, and it's been that's been backed by really good financials. Yeah, I think I think we're going to see a lot more of these types of firms.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it's not going anywhere, is it? And especially, I think what's quite interesting there is obviously we've got that US, UK, and we know that in the US litigation is, it's never ending and people will sort of litigate about the smallest things. So it's quite interesting, maybe a contrast and compare of the litigation boutiques maybe in the US and the UK to kind of see how they fare against each other would be quite interesting. So next we have sort of what's actually been going on in the world this week. So we have Emmanuel and Brigitte Macron, France's first couple, are suing a right-wing podcaster in a US court about a sort of defamation claim. This is unusual, I think. There's so many people out there that will be, sort of having their say about Emmanuel and Brigitte Macron day to day, right? So I wonder what has made them sort of bring this claim forward and why this podcaster. What are your thoughts on this?
I think they've filed about a 219-page motion. I think the podcast series that she did was very detailed and very thorough. So there's obviously a lot of detail they could put in their filings. I think this is going to be very, very high profile, and it'll be interesting to see the outcome of this. And I think the wider sort of defamation landscape, but particularly podcasters who are sort of have platforms now on YouTube and TikTok, is this going to open the floodgates for defamation claims for people who are making, claims like Hannah Sowens is currently doing?
Yes, I I agree with that. I think actually linking to the last story, funny enough, I'm just actually as you're talking, I was actually running through some of the detail. Uh, the Macrons are represented by Claire Locke, a law firm set up a wee while ago by two ex Kirkland partners who are married. Interestingly, and that must be quite intense. But so I think that's quite interesting in respect to the last story. But what it tells me is there is. I can't believe some of the detail actually that in this podcast. It just looks absolutely nuts. But equally, just to reinforce your point, El, if you are a defamation lawyer, there is a hell of a lot of media out there in which your clients can be defamed. Podcasts, TikTok, not just the traditional media now, or even what we see as, classic social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Really, really changing. There is something quite, I don't know what it is. My dad lives in France, and we talk quite a lot about Macron. He really likes him. Uh, but he is a bit of a figure of fun, isn't he, in the media here? And I think that's a bit unwarranted. I always think some of the coverage of him has a slight sort of tongue-in-cheek air. Maybe it's because people kind of think he's vain or something. I don't know, but I think there's whiffs of it in that. And obviously his relationship is questioned quite a lot because of the age difference and things. And there's sort of I kind of feel for them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this case goes. I think I'll be following it quite closely, as I think a lot of people will be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very tempted. I was very tempted to insert a slap joke, which slaps on the media and slaps on planes, but I couldn't quite work it in.
Yeah. Maybe we'll give it some time, and maybe at the end of the podcast, Ben,
We'll come back to you.
Yeah. Well, I think my takeaway from this is, as you say, there's quite a lot of controversy around them as a couple, right? You have the age difference, as you mentioned. You have the thing about the plane. This has actually maybe come at a good time for them, because what I see it as is a bit of a lesson. I think they're doing this with Candace as a high profile podcaster and sort of influencer. They're going to take her to court to kind of show everyone else we're made of stronger stuff than this, like that's kind of what I get from it, that they're kind of trying to teach people a lesson, and maybe quell.
Oh, sorry, Olivia. I was just going to say they also they had a lawsuit against a couple of French journalists as well a couple of years ago, didn't they? Who I think were the ones who sort of started this theory, and then Candace went to sort of run with it. But she has such a large platform in the US, so I think it's gone quite global. Whereas previously it was sort of just within the French press, and I think Candace has sort of made this. She's taken this sort of worldwide, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the exact same. And as I say, I think this is kind of like a last straw for them, and they're going to take it all the way. So yeah, we'll be following that closely. One of the top stories of the week this week in sort of the business press, the Times, the FT, is Tom Hayes winning the fight to overturn the libor-rigging conviction, which it's an interesting story. Ben, I think you've got a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, I've been, choose my words carefully, but firm I used to work with, we were heavily involved in some litigation around LIBOR, and I've always tracked it. But I've always been fascinated by people like Tom Hayes and Nick Leeson. These almost kind of Shakespearean figures who have such power at their fingertips, and when things go wrong, boy, they really go wrong. And you really feel for the guy. He's got I think he's neurodiverse. His marriage broke down when he was in prison, and he got a punchy sentence. Was it like 14 years? And he was sent to Belmarsh, which is listeners might know is a very, very tough prison, known for sort of housing very violent criminals and terrorists and things like that. So, in terms of equating it to our world, when financial crime happens, it really, really seems that, the judiciary take a very tough approach to traders. You'd argue perhaps more so than some violent criminals at times. And I think some of the devil is in the detail, isn't it? That the judge was seen to have been not quite on his game. That's it. The jury had been misdirected by the judge. I'm just reading Jonathan's piece in the Times. Sorry, Ben Martin's piece, the banking editor, and it doesn't reflect brilliantly on the SFO. We haven't really had SFO bashing for a while, but there's always it always seems to be just around the corner. But yeah, I for me this is a human interest story. I do find these characters really fascinating.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting to sort of see it come full circle, from where they started and now where we've ended up. It is definitely it's a story. I mean, will we see a Netflix sort of program on this, or a BBC? Probably quite soon, because it's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, a great story for this week.
How long did he serve? Was it about over 5 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of a 14-year sentence. So, it's a lot of time to, especially in a prison like that, like you mentioned, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
It's always, from a press perspective, I remember all the coverage at the time, looking at some of the transcripts of what the traders have been saying to each other, and some of the language. I don't just mean sort of choice, language, but some of the way they describe some of these trades is very, very fast and loose. So people can dig out, and there's a lot on it in the FT. If people can dig that out, it's definitely worth reading.
So on to the next and final stories of the week. This is top 10 AI blunders that was in law.com, written by Caroline Byrne. This is quite funny, but it's actually not funny when you think about it. This is quite serious, but you can't help but laugh at the genuine blunders of professionals. And it's quite scary to think about, you trust these people so much, and they trust AI. AI doesn't know what it's doing. They've not been through the training, they've not been through the law degree, and they're making things up, but they don't have the knowledge. So we've got 10 cases here. We've all picked one each. Eleanor, do you want to start with your favourite case or blunder?
Yes, I think it was an English barrister who was sanctioned after citing 5 fake cases, and then dismissing them as cosmetic errors. So I've heard about this happening quite a bit, both in the UK and in the US, actually. And it just goes to show you it's a bit of a cautionary tale that you can use this technology, but you need you still need that sort of human oversight, and you can't just sort of trust it sort of blind, basically. And I think that there's probably a piece around sort of proper training in terms of actually using this technology. I think firms are quite quick to sort of say that they're using AI and they're implementing it, but there needs to be the sort of proper training for lawyers and barristers and into how they should actually be using this technology. I
think that, and I think I may have said this on a previous podcast, that just relating to your point, El, the ability to use AI well is a real art form, and it's a proper skill, and it's something that you can monetize and sell. And I don't want to say that none of the protagonists in these examples can do that, but to your point, lazy use of AI, wanting it to do your thinking for you, is going to end in failure. The ability to master and manipulate, if that's the right word, things like ChatGPT, I think is going to be one of the great skills of our times. But the one I've picked out is, I love the headline as much as anything. ChatGPT made me do it. Two New York lawyers were sanctioned quite heavily in New York by turning up at a personal injury claim, offering up 6 fictitious cases as precedents for something that they were doing. And they admitted it. They said, "We made a good faith mistake in failing to believe that a piece of technology could be making up cases out of nowhere," which is quite funny. That was but all the examples are broadly similar, but that one made me chuckle.
And I think the thing is here, going on to my story, you think that maybe these lawyers are not the best, maybe they're kind of middle of the road or, whatever. But here we have Donald Trump's ex-lawyer, Michael Cohen's, who also found himself in a bit of a pickle when it comes to AI. He used Google Bard AI and submitted fake case citations. And he actually blamed his co-workers or his juniors and said, well, I would have expected them to have checked the cases before to make sure they were real. I don't know how much of an excuse that is to kind of point the finger when you're the one in charge. But yeah, so that's that. But as in a typical sort of maybe lawyer way to kind of wheedle yourself out of it and kind of point the finger. And
yes, a bit of a lack of accountability.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of hold the mirror up to someone else and say it was their fault. But I mean, there you go. So it's happening, top end of the scale. Donald Trump's own lawyer has been caught out for this, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely happening across the board, and I think we'll continue to see cases like this.
Mm-hmm. I wish they had more coverage. I wish they had more airtime. I think, there we go. We've got 10 cases there, and there's probably hundreds more like that. And I kind of wish it was brought, more to the fore of the press, because this is shocking. And I wonder maybe it'll kind of catch on and people will cover it more. But, I haven't heard of half of these. And to me, that's big news. But there we go. So I guess we'll all have to maybe just double check whatever anyone's sending us. Just make sure it's real, first of all. But yeah, so I guess that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Ben and Eleanor, for joining me this week.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your input and thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.